Good day and welcome. I'm Rick, a man of history and your guide to the past. Today we're venturing back to the 17th century in the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, and we're taking a step onto the battlefield, a step towards the fighting. Now, if you're not already familiar with the period or the causes of the war or the people that fought them or how you could tell friend from foe, you can check out some of my previous videos and I cover all those topics to give you a good idea of what's going on. But if you are familiar or you just want to find out about the soldiers, please do keep watching, because today we are going to look at the soldiers, the people that fought on the early modern battlefield, on the battlefield of the English Civil War, the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, the Bishops' Wars, the Irish Confederate Wars. Consider how they fought and what equipment they used. But first, a quick aside. So one thing I do need to make clear is that what I'm talking about today is an ideal rather than necessarily a truth. It's an ideal presented in instruction manuals, in woodcuts, and that was sought by commanding officers. But the truth is there simply weren't enough muskets or pikes or armour or hats or shoes to go round and outfit everybody properly, particularly not at the start of the war. At Edgehill Hill, the first big fight of the English Civil War, there were certainly well-armed, well-outfitted companies, but there were also people who brought their own weapons or that were armed with whatever they managed to find. The county armories and the gentlemen who had their own arms and armour for defence and their own use, well, these were turned out and they were used for supply, but there were also people who simply had well, whatever they were managed to lay their hands on, and lots of people who wouldn't even have had a good soldier's coat. Military industries developed, and they developed pretty quickly, and so did the supply of weapons, armour, gunpowder and the like coming from the continent. And by the end of the war, things were very, very different, but still far from perfect, and particularly far from perfect for the king. But at the beginning of the war, at the beginning of the conflict at least, in many places, an ideal was really all they had. So today we're looking not at the causes of the civil wars or the people that fought in them or why they fought or what have you. Instead we're looking at the soldiers, who the soldiers were, how they were armed and armoured, what the differences between these different types of fighting man was. But enough from me, time to hear from an expert. Some will tell you that before the war came, people were unprepared and unaware of the realities of modern war, but this is simply not true. Many moneyed and educated people were following news of war in Germany and Italy and the Low Countries. They had purchased and read manuals of arms and instructions for young officers, had trained with sword and with horse and with pistol, or had direct experience of fighting in those wars, mostly on behalf of Sweden or within the ranks of Protestant German states, though people from all parts of England, Scotland, Wales and even Ireland journeyed to the continent and could be found fighting for religion or for pay in armies on all sides of these conflicts. Moreover, there were both county militias and trained bands, local defence forces made up of the citizens of town and country, local defence forces which were armed and trained to a certain degree and a varying degree depending on the county or the town. Plus there were companies of volunteers, particularly and notably in London, who outfitted themselves and trained themselves to be remarkably effective and somewhat decorative soldiers. However, and speaking generally, there are broadly three types of soldier who make up an army: foot, horse and guns. Guns or cannon are the rarest. Garrisons and smaller armies might have none or very few, for they require skilled specialists to command, usually called gunners, though the crew may be made up of semi-trained artisans, matrosses, artillerymen, rather than specialists. And in some places gunners' wives may fight and may help to work the guns, particularly in fortresses and in static defences. Some gunners, many gunners, are English or Scottish or Welsh, but others are Dutch or Swedish or French or German or what have you, mercenaries who are fighting for pay rather than soldiers loyal to the king or to Parliament. In field armies, the majority of soldiers tend to be foot, either pikemen with long spears of 14 to 18 feet, or musketeers with matchlock muskets capable of shooting a ball of lead some 100 yards or more. Muskets are heavy and relatively slow, and individually not very accurate. But a body of shot can lay down repeated fire, causing a hail of heavy lead musket balls to fall on a large target, such as several dozen or a few hundred men, smashing bones, breaking bodies, even crushing through armour.
Muskets are also relatively rugged weapons, and a man of only moderate intelligence can be taught to be a competent musketeer with very few days of training. Pike are effective and intimidating weapons. Imagine a forest of spikes coming towards you, great diamond tips glinting in the sun, with shafts as long as 3 men are tall in a dense mass. But they are intended to protect the shot, to protect the musketeers from attack rather than to be used on the offence. And the idea is to have 3 or 4 shot for each pike. But regiments often have as many pike as shot, and it's very rare to have more than 2 muskets for each pike. So pike are often employed on the battlefield to drive off other foot, to drive them away at point of pike, as well as to ward off horse. In garrisons and for smaller raiding forces, there tend to be more horse than foot. And horse are either cavalrymen called harquebusier, who have partial armour and carbines, short muskets or pistols, or dragoons, who are mounted musketeers. Harquebusier fight from horseback, usually arme blanche, that is, cutting or stabbing with a blade or with pistols and carbines at arm's length against other cavalry, or at very close range with devastating effect against foot. Dragoons are mounted musketeers, usually on much lower quality horses, and they fight on foot with their muskets, but the horses allow them to move and deploy quickly. There are other types of horsemen though. The Scots, they use lancers, armed with long spears, although much shorter than a pike. They also usually carry pistols and a carbine, and quite possibly a sword too. They're very effective light cavalry, but can't withstand the charge from heavier horse. And the heaviest horse are the cuirassiers, heavily armoured horsemen riding big horses covered in metal from head to toe. But they are expensive, and they need big horses, and they need skilled and strong men to ride them. And only the Earl of Essex's Lifeguard and Sir Arthur Hasselrigg's London Lobsters are really deserving of that name. I will tell you a little of how they fight together more properly in the future, but in general, and particularly in set-piece battles and larger skirmishes, foot hold the centre of a battle line, with regiments and battalia having hard collections of pike, with wings or sleeves long lines of musketeers at either side. And they're deployed as if on a chessboard or a draftsboard in a checkerboard fashion. If there are cannon, they will be in the centre too, or just behind this infantry if they have a hill, and horse will be on the flanks, the cavalry at the sides, and the horse will try to get behind or to the side of the infantry, and to prevent the cavalry of the other side from doing the same. Thus there are 2 fights, foot against foot in the centre, trying to drive the other off and to capture the centre ground, and horse against horse on the wings. The fight in the centre is in many ways the most important one, as whichever infantry holds the field determines who wins or loses the battle. But whoever gets the victory of their horse, and who is able to turn their horse to the sides or to the rear of the enemy infantry, tends to be the one who secures a crushing, a rousing, a significant victory. And it's cavalry who can turn a victory into a rout. But I've talked mostly about field armies and the soldiers you'll find in them. These are the forces who get the cream of the recruits, the best of the arms and armour available. They might be recruited by generals and colonels directly, but often are recruited or sent from smaller forces which hold castles and towns and strong points for king or for parliament, strong points called garrisons. In a field army there may be 1 horseman for every 3 or 4 or 5 footmen, but garrisons need to exert control and project military power over as large an area as possible, so they wish to have many more horse than that. They might have as many horsemen as they do foot for a regular garrison, and smaller garrisons, some of them are made up entirely of horse, harquebusier or dragoons. Because harquebusier and dragoons can move faster, they can ride and strike where they're not expected, and they can extract taxes and offer control over a much wider area than people moving on foot. Though musketeers and pikemen are much better at holding ground or for manning defences at forts and fortresses and earthworks, or for escorting and defending wagons against cavalry. Garrisons control land and they project power. Most fights are between these, not between the big armies in open battle. There's skirmishes and sieges between forces which might number only a few dozen or a handful of 100 men. often without any artillery, regularly with weapons made by local craftsmen or made by military industries which simply did not exist before the war came. Thus, in field armies you have more regular soldiers who are more regularly armed and who fight in ways described in the drill books and instruction manuals and in accounts from the continent. The majority of soldiers, however, are less regularly armed and maybe using bills or axes even, and in some cases are citizen soldiers in the truest sense, fighting only part-time whilst farming the land or working their trade in towns. The manner of fighting between field army and garrison is different, with many more fights being skirmishes and sieges of varying sizes from 20 or 30 men to a few thousand than major set-piece battles.
Well, I hope you found that useful and interesting, and that it gives you an idea of the different sorts of people you may encounter on a 17th century battlefield. If you'd like to consider the different types of soldier in more detail and in more depth, and to really get an idea of the tools of their trade, don't worry, as I will look at these in future videos. As always, if there's another part of our shared past that interests you, or a topic or a theme you'd like me to address, please tell me in the comments and I'll see what I can do. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter or on Instagram. Meanwhile, if you like this video, please like it. If you find it interesting, please share it. If you'd like to join me again in the past, please subscribe for more. Until next time, stay safe, stay happy, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.